So I guess I haven't really put out anything that was actually quality or informational content in a little while. It's kind of just been self-aggrandizing posts or just like fun stuff I've been doing here and there. So I figured I would just make something that I feel like is somewhat informational to give to you guys, if it helps in any way. I know with a lot of this stuff, it's the basics for the most part, so there are only so many ways that you can kind of skin a cat, and for the most part the basics work. But for me, the biggest thing that I've been trying to focus on in the past year or 2 years has been variety, just because I know that sometimes, you can be disciplined, you can stick to a lot of your meal plan, but unless you're really enjoying it, then it's kind of hard to follow. You feel like you're having to just grind through it, and you don't really want to have to think about your day-to-day or the long term being something that you feel like you have to suffer through. So for me, having variety in taste and texture and ingredients, other things like that, kind of keeps me looking forward to my different meals of the day, but I also know that I can still kind of hit all my goals that I want to, but enjoy them at the same time. So lately I've been waking up around 5, and typically my first meal of the day will be my pre-workout meal. So usually I'll have 2 cinnamon raisin bagels, some Kerrygold butter, some honey, and then one of the Fage or Fage yogurts. I typically like to have the 5% fat ones because I just find that the texture is a lot more enjoyable. But typically before a workout, I like to have something that's a little bit higher carb and not as much protein or fat, just because I find that you don't feel like you're just digesting the whole time. You feel like you're satisfied, but you don't feel like you're full or kind of bloated or anything like that when you go into your workout. So after I get home from my lift, I'll typically have a heartier meal that's a little bit more of a better ratio of protein, carbs, fats. So I'll typically have some oats that I'll just put some frozen blueberries on top. I'll cook that in the microwave, and then after it's out and hot and kind of mixed together, I'll mix in some whey, which lately I've been using the Bomar one. It's a good isolate, and I feel like before I had bought just like the gold standard from Costco or something that was in a bulk size, but I just find that for some reason it's just started to mess up my stomach lately. So I've been finding that the isolate digests a little bit easier. So after I mix in the whey, I would typically add in some chocolate chunks, and I just usually get the higher cocoa value, just so it's a little bit less sugar, but you still get a little bit of that flavor. And then I'll also just put some cinnamon on top. And I'll usually eat that with a little bit of a quiche or frittata that I make. So for that, I typically just chop up and cook some mushrooms in a pan. After that, I'll cook some spinach in the pan and then throw that into 2 little baking pans. And I'll mix up the equivalent of about 2 eggs a day. And then for the whole week, I'll also add in 2 cartons of egg whites. So if that makes sense, that's a dozen eggs for the week and 2 cartons of egg whites that I'll mix all together, and then I'll pour that on top in the pan. I'll cook it at about 400 for about 20 minutes, and then I'll just divide both of those tins into about 6 slices and have 2 slices a day. So later on in the day, I'll typically have some salmon, and I usually have about 8 ounces a day. And I'll usually grill that, but if it's too cold to grill, I'll just cook it in the oven. But I'll typically have that with some teriyaki sauce over top of a rice mixture that I make. And typically I'll take the rice with some shredded carrots and some turmeric, and I'll cook that all together, and it's pretty flavorful, and the turmeric also helps with digestion. So I'll typically have that, put the salmon on top, and then put some teriyaki on top of that. Later on in the day, I'll make meatballs out of ground turkey, feta, and breadcrumbs. And usually I'll have about 3 pounds of ground turkey that I'll use for the week. I like the 93%. Just because I feel like it's a good balance between, it's got enough kind of juiciness, but it's also not too fatty, if that makes sense. So I'll typically just mix that. I've got 2 pounds today that I'm showing you, and that's just because I had leftover ground turkey from the weekend. So I'll typically just mix that all together in a bowl, portion it out into even sized meatballs, and then cook that in the pan, just flipping it over every now and then. And I'll put that over top of the same rice mixture. So during the day, I typically have about 200 grams of rice that I divide equally into those kind of portions. Usually as the day winds down, my last meal of the day will be some steak and some potatoes. So I've just grilled up some sirloin. I'll typically have about 8 ounces of that a day, over top of about 350 grams of a red and yellow potato blend. And I'll usually just cut those up, put some salt and pepper, some olive oil on top, and then put that all together, and I'll usually just put some A1 on top as well. And typically before I go to bed, I'll just finish the day with a shake. I've just been using this Whey lately. It's got good ratios. It's a little bit thin in terms of consistency, but it's pretty easy to down. And then also the flavor is pretty good. It's not anything to write home about, but it's pretty easy to drink and a good way to just kind of cap off the day, get the rest of the protein in. So all in all, that's what I've been eating lately in terms of calories and macros. I'll probably try to keep that down the same line as the year goes on. I might try to increase it a little bit more. The hard part has been to kind of stay consistent with it all. So that's what I've been trying to work on in the past few months. So the biggest thing is just to try to make sure that you make time for your meals and actually stay prepared as far as that goes. So good luck out there. Hope this helps in some way.